What's up, YouTube? Welcome to the Wright State University Veteran Voices Project. I am Navy veteran and content manager Jeremy Tkach. On behalf of the Veteran Voices Project, we'd like to thank you for watching this interview and to let you know that the best way to support us, and especially the veterans featured on this channel, is to hit that subscribe button. So go ahead, feel free to smash that subscribe button, please hit that like button, and go ahead and comment and share. Again, thank you for watching this important story. Hope you enjoy.
We are recording the interview of Glenn Costie. This interview is being recorded by Ericka Carter from the Wright State University Veterans Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the New Media Incubator. It is 1:50 p.m. on February 8th, 2019. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm doing well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out here today.
Surely.
Okay. When and where were you born?
I was born in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is in the Shenandoah Valley, in September of 1961.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My mom is Patricia Swanson Costie, and she was a cytologist, which is a position in the lab that looks at various cells for cancer. So she was all about identifying healthy cells and cancer cells for the patients that were in their hospital. And my dad was a microbiologist, and he worked for Merck & Company and was responsible for the sterile operations at a pharmaceutical factory in our town. So he would take what the researchers would come up with in a lab and then gross it up to the pills and the injections and things that you would use to administer medications.
Wow.
Very exciting work and difficult work, because trying to create a sterile environment for millions of pounds of product is very stressful. And I can remember him getting phone calls at home when a batch would come through that was contaminated, and it was like you just lost millions of dollars worth of product. So it was a lot of work to keep everything sterile and good for the medications they were making.
Did you ever get to go to work with him or your mom?
We went, I was able to visit my mom at work. I worked at the hospital that she worked at. That was my first summer job, was working in the hospital kitchen, so I would be able to go see her in her workspace. And then for my dad, because it was a manufacturing setting, we were only allowed to come on Family Day, and I can remember there was a 50th anniversary of the factory, so we were able to go see some of the areas there, but it was, a factory's kind of dangerous work, so sometimes you don't want to have the outside public coming in there.
Okay, did you have siblings?
I had a sister, my sister Jill. She was born 2 years after me, and unfortunately we lost her a couple of years ago. She had a drinking problem, so she was an alcoholic and succumbed to her disease. And we went through a grieving process with her, and we actually were able to celebrate her life with all of her friends and produced a video very much like this with folks just describing their stories and memories of my sister.
Well, that's delightful. Okay, so you're not a veteran.
No, I'm not a veteran.
You are a champion of veterans.
I am very much a champion of veterans, yes. I was thinking about my interview today, about when I first knew veterans or became aware of veterans, and I thought about Mr. Doval, who was a World War II veteran, and he was in our church, and he had spent time in a prisoner of war camp in Germany. I think he lost his legs due to his accident. He was a bombardier in his bombing plane was shot down and lost his legs through that process. So I remembered him as sort of the first veteran I had contact with. And then later, as I was older, I remember another veteran was the son of one of my dad's friends, Mr. Howdishell, and his son was a Vietnam veteran, and his son was not doing very well when he came back from the war, so he was abusing drugs, and I remember hearing my dad talking with his friend on the phone about that veteran. So that was another veteran I met. And then the third veteran I remember as a kid growing up was when I was in college, and I was a freshman in college, and it took me a little bit of time to get serious about my studies. And in my class was a veteran who had finished, I think 4 or 6 years of his military commitment. And I just remember thinking how much more mature he was than me and how squared away he was and focused, and thought that was going to help him be more successful in his college career than I was, because I was still sort of playing when I first started school. So those were my memories of where I first became aware of veterans. And then out of college, I was interviewed for a job at the VA, and that's when I first, well, it probably was the second time I learned about the VA, but I was interviewed for a job in the engineering department and became a trainee, a staff engineer trainee in the VA system, and then worked my entire career with the VA. Later on in my career, I realized that I had an uncle who was also in the VA. My uncle was a Lutheran pastor who had his own church, and he was working part-time at the VA and later became a full-time chaplain with the VA. So I kind of had that in my family as well. And my wife, when I got married, my wife's father is a Korean War veteran, so became very aware of his service to our country. And then he gets his care full-time at the VA, so I was able to be with him when he was getting his care at the VA and help him out at times when there was glitches in his care episodes.
Okay. I want to just talk about what degree you had that would have put you in an engineering department. Can you talk to me about your schooling? Like in high school, did you play any sports or have any interest or extracurricular activities?
In high school, I was always kind of a geek, kind of skinny, and I didn't really fill out to become a man body, and you will, until later on in my life. So I started playing some sports. I remember playing basketball in 8th grade, and just never really had that sort of coordination skills. I did join the tennis team in high school and played a little bit of high school tennis, but sports was definitely not my focus. I had a circle of friends, a smaller circle of friends in my high school, and we were all in a college-bound curriculum, and we had a math teacher, Mr. Reiner was our calculus teacher. And my school in the Shenandoah Valley was a very rural environment, a lot of farming communities, and our high school was not quite as advanced as some of the kids that went to school in Northern Virginia. So for us to get calculus in as a high school student, we had to go to summer school, and so we did that, and Mr. Reiner was very instrumental in many of us going to college. And at that time, in the late 70s, engineering was a big focus. Today we would call that STEM focus, but then it was engineering. So a lot of the classmates that I went through high school with would go on to college. Many of them became engineers, and it was really Mr. Reiner that influenced us. And then as far as picking mechanical engineering, which is what my degree is in, I really just liked motors and cars and those kinds of mechanical things, and was always taking things apart and trying to put them back together again. So I think I gravitated toward that. Other fields of engineering like electrical engineering or chemical engineering are very theoretical. So it's hard to see how the engineering processes work, and with mechanical engineering, you generally can see what you're dealing with or feel it if it's an air conditioning system or a plumbing system, and that's really where I gravitated toward. I wasn't very good academically. You know, I thought that I would maybe wind up in a design setting as a consultant, or maybe working in a manufacturing facility helping with the engineering pieces. And I never really heard about hospital engineering or facilities engineering. And it wasn't until I interviewed with the VA that I learned about this field called facilities engineering, where any large group of buildings, whether it's a college campus, a hotel chain, you know, corporations that own office buildings, have a department that manage the building and manage the renovations and the maintenance of the buildings. And that's really what the field that I went into. And in the hospital engineering field, there's medical equipment repair, there's a safety program, there's construction, there's general maintenance and housekeeping, and that was the field that I went into, and ultimately started as a trainee and then worked my way up in the VA system and became what we call a chief of engineering service or a vice president of facilities.
How old were you when you graduated college?
So I was 24 when I graduated school. It took me an extra year to get through. And then my first job was at the VA in Martinsburg, West Virginia. And it was a brand new facility. I remember thinking that, you know, this must be a wonderful agency to be joining, because the building was brand new. It was built in 1983, and I think I got there in '84. So brand new facility. I was a trainee. I had my own office, and I thought, wow, this is really sweet. And then my next assignment after that, after a year at Martinsburg, was going to Chicago, and I was down at the Gold Coast at a high-rise VA built in the 1950s, very old, needed a lot of repair work, and had to share an office at that point. So reality set in on the different levels of the VA facilities. From Chicago, I met my wife there, Tammy, and we wound up joining our careers together. She left the Chicago VA to pursue her career at the VA in West Haven, Connecticut, and then ultimately I was able to follow her there, and we both worked at the VA in West Haven. She was working in human resources, and I was working in the engineering department, and I became a supervisor there, managing a construction program, and from there, we got married when we were in Connecticut in our friend's home, Maria and Fred Roy, who we still stay in touch with every year. And we bought a house there together, and then left Connecticut and went to Cleveland, Ohio. And I can remember at that point in the VA career, my VA career, the positions that you got were arranged for you ahead of time. So you would get a phone call from somebody from central office, and they would suggest that you apply for a job at a particular facility because that was where you needed to go next in your career. And I was on vacation visiting family in Wisconsin, and they somehow tracked me down in this very obscure part of Wisconsin and suggested that on the way back across to Connecticut, you should stop by in Cleveland and interview and see what you think about this opportunity there. So the Cleveland VA is a two-division hospital. There's a VA in the suburbs called in Brecksville, Ohio, and there's a VA downtown, very much inner city VA environment. And we interviewed at the VA in the suburbs, and I just remembered thinking that no matter what the downtown VA would look like, I could handle it if we could work out in the suburbs and travel downtown for the job. So we accepted the position, and both of us were offered opportunities. Again, Tammy worked in HR, and I was at that point becoming the assistant chief of engineering, and later became the chief. And stayed there for about 15 years, and at that point I was the youngest chief engineer in the VA system, and you know, wherever I've worked in my career, as I think back on how I've served veterans, I have taken difficult assignments really without knowing it. I sort of was naive at some point, but this facility was in major need of renovation and needed actually to be downsized a little bit. And I was lucky enough to have a very supportive senior leader. Bill Montague was the CEO of the hospital, and he had a unique ability to get resources. So for an engineer who is always asking for resources, to have a boss who was able to get you what you needed was very exciting. And at the end of my time there at Cleveland, we had built up the largest construction program, over almost $1 billion of construction, along with leasing agreements and new construction, renovation, and it was very, very historic at times. And ultimately, the VA Medical Center now is all consolidated downtown in a very nice space, and it's the crown jewel of the VA system. And in the city of Cleveland, it's considered one of the best facilities for veterans to get care. So I was blessed to be part of that, and always felt like that all veterans should get care like that in a facility that is respectful of their service to our country. And that's kind of how I always approached any of the work I did. I always thought that we should have the best for our veterans and provide the best facilities for our veterans.
Okay. Before college, after college, was it an active choice for you not to join the military? Was that opportunity ever presented to you?
You know, it never was. I remember my dad telling me that he graduated in '57, and at that point there was still a mandatory draft. So when you were a citizen of this country, you had a requirement to serve in the military, whether it was after high school or you could delay it until after college. And my dad served 2 years in the military after he graduated from college in '57. And I remember that I think when I graduated high school in '79, they did away with the mandatory draft. You had to register for the selected service, but you never were required to serve. And I think back on that and think about that I could have benefited from some more maturity that the military lifestyle would have given me. But I never thought about serving and really never even thought about investigating that. It was always presented to me as you're going to go to college and get a degree and then go work somewhere in the country.
Is that was that something that your parents really pushed, both them being educated and in work fields that?
Yes, I would say so. I would say there was. I'm sure if I had not been successful in college, that they would have been supportive or suggested other alternatives. But I think when they saw me growing up, recognized my skills, my potential, they always talked about going to college. And you know, I think about that today as an older individual, recognizing that there is a huge demand right now for skilled positions, whether it's skilled manufacturing or work in the trades. And right now, with the salaries you can earn in the trades, you know, that's a very honorable thing to pursue as well. And I know here in the Miami Valley, that's a focus on a lot of our economic development plans, is trying to talk to kids about, you know, it's just not automatically go to college. There are ways you can be successful working without a college degree. And certainly with the expense of college these days, you know, ending that 4 years and then starting to pay off that debt is a big challenge for a lot of folks.
It really, really is. As you were rising in your career, you weren't a vet. Did other vets treat you differently, or did that come up at all?
You know, I probably saw it more when I became a senior leader and began to interact with veterans directly. Growing up in the VA system as an engineering officer, I would interact with veterans very peripherally, maybe at large events where veterans were being recognized, and I might be in the audience, and I might know certainly some of the veterans that worked for me in the department. But it wasn't until I became moved into the C-suite, became a chief operating officer, and then later a CEO of a VA hospital, that I became the focus of veterans more directly. And that generally was the first question I would be asked if I went into a room full of veterans in my role as a senior leader. One of the first icebreaker questions might be, you know, are you a veteran? And so I don't think they treated me differently, but I think it was something I had to overcome. I had to do more to earn their trust. I think if I had been a veteran, they would have assumed a level of trust just based on my past experience. But I did work very hard to earn their trust and do what was right for them wherever I could. And I think that bode well in my career, and my reputation would rise. I remember how proud I was when I would hear about other veterans would say, well, you can trust Mr. Costie, you know, he'll take care of you, he'll do the right thing for you. So I knew that I had arrived at my job when I was able to have that kind of trust and relationship with veterans.
Okay, that's awesome. I do agree, we tend to hesitate when working with people that aren't veterans.
Well, I think it's appropriate. I mean, I think there's a brotherhood and a sisterhood that develops through the experiences that you all have, that you share, and the carousing that goes on between the different branches, I think, is great rivalry. But ultimately, I think every veteran respects every other veteran, no matter where you serve, and that's a valuable thing to have on your resume as you begin moving through life. To be able to know that you can call somebody, or if you need help with something or have a question, you know you can call another veteran. That's a great asset that you've developed.
So when you were at Cleveland for 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
quite a long time, were there any specific situations that you remember that you needed to overcome or that brought you great joy?
You know, I think taking the engineering department to the level that I did during my time there is something I'm always very proud of. You can imagine the bureaucracy of the VA system is pretty significant, and trying to be creative in that environment, trying to come up with strategies that produce excellence was always something that I took on as a challenge that I didn't want to be taken. I didn't like take the answer no and just go away. I really took that as a challenge. So depending on who my boss was at the time, we were able to really build alliances, and certainly the last boss I had with Mr. Montague gave me the freedom to do what I needed to do to do the right thing for the veterans. And so what brought me great joy was that achievement. And then I do recall, you know, as I was getting into my time at Cleveland, in my 40s is where I started feeling like I was repeating myself. And that's when I was thinking about, well, what other ways can I serve veterans, and began to have a little bit more introspection. And you know, I had some conversations with Mr. Montague about potential career paths, and you know, I remember him giving me feedback. He was very much a coach. I think he was a basketball coach on the side with the various private schools in town. So he was very much a coaching type of a leader, and he knew that one of the things I needed to work on was my public speaking and my ability to think on my feet and do interviews very much like this. And so I remember he without warning brought me into a room. He surrounded me with all of my peers, all of my department heads, and put me on a chair in the middle of the room and kind of spun me around, and whoever I was facing would ask me a question, and I would have to answer it. And we did that for about a half an hour, and it really helped me learn how to think on my feet, how to be able to respond to questions, so that when I went to those interviews at that next level, I was able to provide a good interview and really highlight the important pieces of my career. So those were good memories I had of Cleveland. Certainly the circle of friends that I made there at Cleveland. There was a group of about 6 couples that we kind of hung together and did things on the weekend together, and we are very close, and we continue to be very close to this day. We make sure that at least once or twice a year we all kind of get together somewhere in the country. So those kinds of bonding experiences are very much like your military career, where you have a circle of friends that you get through adversity with, and then you stay in touch, and that's something I always value from my VA experience.
Now, now that you're out of the VA system, looking back, because you started in the VA system, so I don't think you may have known what being a civilian was like,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a lot of VA bureaucracy, as you stated. How is that different? The going from the VA to being a civilian, as a civilian, I guess.
Well, you know, I think coming out of the VA and retiring, and as I tell people, I failed very miserably at retirement, so I've only been retired for about a month, and then I began working with Ohio's Hospice, again serving veterans, and I would say that what's liberating is sort of the mission is the same. I mean, our focus is what can we do for the veterans, what can we do for their families, what can we do to reduce their suffering, and if they need help navigating, you know, the admissions process for hospice, certainly helping out. I had a story this week where one of our hospice units was having difficulty getting care for one of their veterans, and they required some VA approvals, and I was able to, through my contacts with the VA, make a phone call and help clear away some of the bureaucracy. So I love the fact that I can still help out veterans and help make their lives a little bit easier, certainly at the important time like this at the end of their lives. You know, as far as the bureaucracy that we have within hospice, I'm again blessed to have a very innovative boss, Kent Anderson, who has really taken our local hospice and become a national best practice. The hospice here in Dayton was one of the first hospices to be established in the country, and we just celebrated our 40th year. And at that point, hospice was very much a homegrown operation. There would be a group of clinicians and caregivers in the community that realized that we need to do something for these patients that aren't going to get better, that have a chronic illness, and we need to make their end of life just a little bit less stressful. And sort of they began a hospice operation here. Kent Anderson has recognized the fact that all of these hospices around the country are really homegrown operations, and depending on the skill sets of a local hospice, they either do a good job with the back office things, or they do, you know, they get by. So what he's been able to offer to the 7 hospices that we've merged with in Ohio is he'll take care of all of the HR stuff, he'll take care of all of the financial management, all the billing. We do that all here in Dayton. And then that allows them to free up staff and free up resources to deliver care to their patients in their communities. So it's been a great model, and it's allowed us to really deliver high quality care. The other piece about the work that we do is that we're a nonprofit. So in the hospice world, there's kind of 2 flavors. There's the for-profit, and then there's the nonprofit. And the for-profit have to pay profits to their stockholders and their equity companies, and that takes money away from the mission. All of us are getting reimbursed the same amount of money. The Medicare benefit that you earn as a citizen of the country is a fixed amount of reimbursement. So the money we get for patient care, we can deliver 100% of those resources go to patient care. And one of the programs that we're able to do that the nonprofits aren't able to do is we do a program called American Pride, and it's an opportunity for us to thank veterans one more time before they pass. And we have a team of volunteers that are all over the state, and it's very much like a fire drill. As you can imagine, in a hospice environment, sometimes we may have a patient for a couple hours, sometimes we may have only a couple of days with the patient. So we will get a phone call from our admissions nurse that they have a person that's a veteran and they would like to have an honor ceremony, and we staff our ceremonies 100% with veterans. They have a script that we go through that involves reading the creed of the branch of service, and it's been amazing, the stories about how that when the patient who may not be responsive hears those words again, they all try to kind of put their hand up and do a salute, or they respond in some way. So it's been very heartwarming to hear those stories. They end their ceremony with a slow military salute that only a veteran knows how to do. You know, civilians try to mimic that, and you know, you watch the various presidents when if they're civilians and they try to salute the Marine there at their Marine One helicopter, and you can just tell that they were a civilian salute. But only military folks know how to do that properly, and so we do that for our veterans. And then we also thank the caregivers and the spouse that may be there with them, and for a lot of our veterans, you know, some of our veterans hold on to things because of just either the guilt of what they've done in the military. At times, there's things they have to do the mission that may be against some of their belief structures, but part of the training in the military is to do the mission. And so at end of life, we find that there are times where folks want to share things only with another veteran that can understand that. And there's a clinical component where we think that we help them with their anxiety, help ease their concerns about what's going to happen next as they make that transition home to God, and there's a clinical benefit to it as well, and we've just gotten a lot of great feedback from our families and our veterans that they appreciate coming and doing the ceremony with them.
I am very honored to be on that team for the hospice and do the ceremonies. It is a wonderful feeling, and it is very humbling. Very, very humbling.
Well, you know, there's a lot of folks who are veterans who aren't part of the VA healthcare system, and so I think a lot of veterans put that experience maybe sometimes on the back burner at times. They get on with their lives. They don't think about their military service, and then at the end of life, I think it comes back to them again. It's kind of where their beginnings were, and allowing us to do that. And you know, it's interesting when we ask the question, "Are you a veteran?" We're very careful not to ask it that way, because we always ask, "Did you have prior military service?" Because if we ask people, "Are you a veteran?" many folks say no, because they may not have actually fought in a war or been in harm's way. But if you ask them, "Did you have prior military service?" we get a lot better response to that question. And they said, "Oh yeah, I served 6 years," or "I served 2 years." And then from there we can develop a relationship and then ask if they'd like to have an honor ceremony. And the vast majority say yes, so we're very blessed to have that. And always looking for volunteers. So if we have any veterans that are interested in serving our core group, you know, I'm the only Glenn Costie in Ohio's Hospice, and we're easy to find, and would just reach out to us on our website and we'll get in touch with you for sure.
Yeah, the American Pride program is amazing. I do really like how on your website, the American Pride website, you can go in and you can enter a vet's information, and then that kind of memorializes them also. So, well,
very much like these videos that you're doing, we have a website that you can go to, and it's open to anybody in the country, really. And you can put a picture of your veteran there. You can put some of their story. You can capture some of their history. And there's a kiosk at our Hospice of Dayton location that you can actually go and see these on the kiosk, or you can show them. You can look at them online, and it's another resource that we offer through our nonprofit status to give families and give veterans a chance to record their history of what they did for our country. It's great. They're great stories, and I'm a big history buff, so it's just fun reading about a veteran who actually was at a beach or at a place that you read about in a history book. Excuse me, you read about in a history book, and be able to see that face and hear that story and think about, well, they came from the Miami Valley. They were here in our neighborhoods doing good work for our country.
Okay. Now, Mr. Costie, I just want to, when you say kiosk, I automatically think of the little bitty ones that we use at the VA, and they're itty bitty. Your kiosk is a really large screen, and you have two of them.
Yes.
It's fancy.
So it's a large screen TV basically, and it's got an interactive screen, so you can push on the various commands, and it's very high tech. It's very easy to use, and it's open. It's really open 24/7. It's outside of our memorial. We have a very nice Veterans Memorial outside of our care facility. It's open to the public, and if you wanted to stop by really anytime, you can see the wonderful large screen TV we have there.
Okay. So we're just going to talk a little bit more about you. Is your wife a vet?
She's not. She's like me. She's grew up in the VA system. She is from a very small town in Wisconsin, Armstrong Creek, Wisconsin. Across the state border from Michigan, where there's a small VA called the Iron Mountain VA. And Tammy will tell the story about going to the Iron Mountain VA with her dad when he was getting care there, and looking up at this big building. Now for her, as a toddler, you know, this 4-story building looked like a skyscraper, and she says, "I'm going to work there someday." And she did. She started off as an intern out of high school working for the forestry department, and that got her into federal service. And then from there, she was able to apply for the VA and got a job there as a ward clerk. Started off as a I think a GS2. And the VA system is wonderful in the sense that it has training programs, and it lets you advance as quickly as you are able to higher levels. So very quickly she identified that she'd like to be in the human resource trainee program. And worked her way up from that, later became a human resource specialist, and then she went over to the clinical side, and she began serving as a executive assistant to the clinical service chief. So she was the assistant to the chief of mental health. And as I began to progress throughout our career, when I went to work in Baltimore, Maryland as the chief operating officer for the VA Maryland healthcare system.
Was this after Cleveland?
This is after Cleveland, yeah.
Okay, so we haven't talked about that yet.
No, not yet.
Okay.
So when I finished that interview, that round robin interview tool that my boss subjected me to, I did apply for a job at the VA in Baltimore, Maryland, and that was my first chief operating officer job. So that was the beginning of on your journey to become a CEO. And because I was in the front office, it was not possible for Tammy to work there because she would be in my chain of command. So she got a job working in central office. So we lived in Columbia, Maryland, and I would commute probably about a half an hour, 45 minutes north to Baltimore. Tammy had to commute. It took her almost 2 hours every day on a bus to get down to D.C. I always say that it's the most powerful city in the world, surrounded by a suburban neighborhood. So all the streets going into Washington, D.C. are always just two-lane streets. So it takes a long time to get to work. And she started working in the VA in central office as again, sort of in the HR arena, putting together nomination packages. You can imagine whenever you hear somebody being nominated by the president for something, it's an important set of documents that really are historic in nature, and they are saved forever. So it's important they're put together in a certain way, and you're finding out through these interviews you've got to do a certain beginning and a certain end for the Library of Congress. Well, it's the same kind of thing for paperwork involving high-level nominations. So she worked those nominations through the system and was sort of the forward face of the VA to these various candidates, because you can imagine you're calling into a bureaucracy and you're applying for a job for the first time with federal service, and it'd be nice to have a friendly face to talk to. So she did that for a while. And then she ultimately ended her career as a executive assistant to Patty Hayes. Patty Hayes was the female veteran program coordinator in the VA, and it's kind of interesting that very late in the VA history, they realized that there were a lot more women serving in the military than they thought, and the VA was set up as a male healthcare system. So there weren't GI clinics for female veterans. There was not a women's clinic. You got your female care through your primary care provider, and in some cases that's just not appropriate. So Tammy was on the team with Dr. Hayes that was able to set up the first women-only clinics, and that you could get care geared toward female veterans. So she ended her career as a GS-14, which was just the highest level she could possibly get, and then working on just a wonderful project that had a national impact for women veterans.
Okay, so Dr. Hayes started it all.
Dr. Hayes was started the whole program. She was the first central office program official for that national female veterans healthcare system. So we were able to set up dedicated clinics at each VA hospital just for female care.
And Miss Tammy did that from Washington, D.C., and that's where it all was headquartered?
It was Washington, D.C., and then after I served at the VA in Baltimore, Maryland, I got my first CEO job working at a very small VA in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, which is in the southeast corner of the state. They call it the Boot Heel. And again, I'm moving out to my first assignment. Tammy can't work for me because she would be in my chain of command. So she was able to arrange a virtual job where she could work online, if you will, wherever we were in the country with Ms. Hayes, so Dr. Hayes. So we got her office space there at the medical center, and she continued her career. And I worked at the VA there for 2 years, and was a great learning experience. I had always worked at big city VAs and sort of had that as my background, and had never worked at a small hospital, and it was always it was heartwarming for me to see that they get the mission done with a lot less resources, but the mission is still as important, and they produce high quality results with an incredibly small staff. I think we had 500 people there at that hospital, very small budget, but we were expected to provide service, the same service that the big city hospitals did, and would collaborate a lot with St. Louis and Little Rock and Memphis hospitals to get our veterans up there for care if we couldn't do it in Missouri. And I was there for about 2 years, and then ended my career at the Dayton VA. In 2011, I came here and became the CEO of the Dayton VA.
Okay, now that's a big, I just have a few questions
Sure.
Before we jump into Dayton VA, and,
Okay.
and that's super important because we're in Dayton, so a
Sure.
lot of our listeners are going to understand and know about that. All right, so I totally think that it's amazing that you found someone with the same passion as you do that started off at such a young age. That is just congrats to you and Miss Tammy.
Yeah, well, it was, Tammy will tell the story about how we met, but I first saw her on a bus. We were commuting back and forth from the suburbs into Chicago, she says she saw me for the first time because she worked in HR, so she saw all the new folks coming in, and she was checking out everybody coming in, looking for somebody that she might want to go out with. So she identified me at some point, and then I of course, I was the one that was asking her to go out, but she had already identified me, so I think she was just waiting for me to ask her, and it's been a wonderful partnership, a great marriage. I mean, we have shared passion for veterans, and then what was nice about the VA system, again, was being able to manage both of our careers, because her career was just as important to her as mine was to me, and we were able to balance that throughout our entire career. So it was a great marriage. It continues to be a great marriage and a great partnership that we both could serve our passions for veterans. Absolutely.
It would appear that you moved a lot, so it was kind of like coming down on orders. We come down on orders depending on what branch. Air
Sure.
Force is 2 years, Army is about 4, or wherever the mission takes you. You mentioned that they kind of set you up to stay on that path. Is that something that the VA does for every employee, or were you just so awesome?
Well, I mean, I think it transitioned while I was in the VA. So probably when I went to Cleveland in 89, I guess is when I went to Cleveland. That was probably the last time that my career was directed from Washington. After that, the VA began realizing that mandatory tours, mandatory tours, and the requirement to move every 2 years was very disruptive to the families, and so as a way to recruit and keep good talent, I think they did away with that and allowed people to kind of direct their own careers, and you could decide when you want to move and when you not want to move. That's kind of a double-edged sword, because sometimes it's good to have fresh ideas and fresh blood in an organization, and sometimes you might have somebody that needs to move on that you could bring in. Somebody else can come in and do a better job, and then sometimes maybe it's a bad person stays there forever and you wish they would move on. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, but they kind of did away with that during my time at Cleveland. So after that, you kind of were on your own to begin applying for jobs, and certainly jobs that were in very in-demand locations were tough to get. And then if you applied for a job at a tough VA or a difficult place to live, like Baltimore, a high cost of living area, you could get those jobs. And I guess I always was up for a challenge, and figured that anything would be only for a few years, and you could change if you didn't like living there. So I wasn't fearful of it. It was kind of exciting to begin moving again after being in Cleveland for a while. So it was self-directed, and certainly my reputation as sort of somebody that could turn around organizations was the reason why I came to Dayton. I realized that when I went to Cleveland as the chief engineer, that was a program in trouble, and I was able to turn that around and really develop a strong program. And when I went to Baltimore, they had a series of incidences there that I was able to help shore up and to deliver some process improvements that helped make them a stronger organization. And certainly when I got the phone call about considering coming to Dayton, in that case I was being recruited to come here, that they had an incident with some care delivery issues involving some infection control issues within their dental clinic. A lot of national scandal. It was probably one of the first VA scandals, and they needed somebody to come in and help turn around the organization. And I was able to do that, and I was very lucky. During one of my first days coming to Dayton, was meeting Anne Monet, who was my nurse executive, and she introduced me to a culture that she was trying to promote called relationship-based care. And it has a very simple mantra that basically involves take care of your veteran, take care of yourself, and take care of the peers around you. If you do those 3 things very well, all your metrics will rise. And I really resonated with me. It just sounded like the right thing to do. So we began implementing the relationship-based care culture, not only in nursing service and all the clinical services, but began rolling it out into the admin services. So you can imagine a police officer who's used to rule enforcement and following by the book, trying to get them to come on to this concept of how do I develop a relationship with somebody I'm trying to control through rules? And it was interesting watching the police department at Dayton turn around and become relationship-based care, and they actually developed a new way of policing called neighborhood policing. So at the Dayton VA, we have a very large campus, 400 acres of land, many, many buildings, and they began to assign police officers to the same buildings in the same area of the campus. So they began to know who they were working with in the various buildings, and it really actually helped them get tips on things that they may need to take action on that was able to develop because they had trust with the people that they were policing. Very much like what you hear happening in the city of Dayton with getting to know your beat cop that's on your street. So very successful program that really resulted in Dayton becoming one of the top performing hospitals in the country, and it was gratifying to be able to retire in 2017, sort of at the top of my game, and leave the Dayton VA in very good hands for the future leaders.
Okay, so I have a few questions, but I'm going to go back to you came from a small VA to fix the big VA.
Mm-hmm.
What was the budget differences, if you can recall some roundabout numbers?
So it was like about $120 million at the Missouri VA, and then the Dayton VA is $500 million, so it's almost a $500 million. So the Dayton VA has 2,500 employees. They had 500 employees in Missouri. We had the same number of outpatient clinics, which was interesting in that, in Missouri, when you start moving west of the Mississippi, travel distances become large. So in Ohio, I could travel 4 hours and get to my regional office to see my boss. In Missouri, I had to go 8 hours because it was just that further across the state. They had the same issue with patient care, trying to take care of veterans in a very rural part of the country where an outpatient clinic might be 2 hours, 3 hours away, and trying to deliver care from your main medical center all the way out there was very, very challenging. So it really required employees to work independently and to really take care of their communities. And I tried to give them that freedom. I tried not to be controlling from the mothership. I let them have the resources they needed, the staff they needed, and then expected them to deliver the results that we were achieving for our veterans. We opened up one outpatient clinic when I was there in Arkansas, across the border from where we were in Missouri, in a very small town. Had to recruit physicians from the community and to come to the VA and to learn our system of care, and ultimately, those veterans who are having to either go 3 hours south to Little Rock or 3 hours east to Memphis, or more like 4 hours all the way up to St. Louis, now they had the clinic in their community, so we could bring the care to them versus making them drive all those distances. So coming up with strategies to deliver health care in a very rural environment was exciting, and another kind of a challenge that we had to overcome. Delivering the telemedicine to those locations when you don't have a fiber optic system like you have in the big cities was another big challenge of how can we set up a telemedicine communication system there that works well for the clinicians, so that a clinician can sit in the main medical center but still do an outpatient visit in the rural part of the state. Was all very exciting, and we actually developed, because we were so rural, we had a very robust telemedicine system that we were very proud of.
That is wonderful. What kind of leader are you?
People describe me as a servant leader, and I think that's an applicable way of describing it. I don't know all the answers. I'm very honest to say that I don't have all the answers. I'm very hands-off as far as day-to-day details, and I really delegate down to my chain of command, give them the resources they need, and give them the metrics or the accountability that we're going to use to measure their operation. And then I really let them do their jobs and try to stay away. As the senior leader, I focused more on being the face of the VA, be out in the community. So I was away from the medical center a lot, and trying to promote the VA and trying to recruit veterans to come to our system of care. And if there were issues or challenges, I would be the face of the VA in front of the cameras to answer the media, to help provide some of the answers to the questions that they might have. So I very much was a hands-off leader and really tried to promote my employees. And I guess the other quality I bring is coaching and mentoring. So I was always interested in serving as a mentor to any of our employees, either inside the medical center or sometimes on a national basis. As we were trying to develop new leaders to fill the CEO role, I would be a mentor or coach to a new up-and-coming leader. And we would get together at conferences or through our telemedicine or our teleconferencing system, have meetings that way, and trying to help them learn how to be successful in the VA. So being a servant leader and trying to coach up the next generation of leaders was sort of my big focus as a senior leader at the Dayton VA.
Okay. Why did you leave the Dayton VA?
You know, I got to the point in my career, it probably was a little bit like when I left Cleveland. The bureaucracy of the VA was getting to the point that was starting to get challenging, and I found myself having to say no to veterans, which I really resisted. During my latter part of my career at Dayton, I was asked to serve at other places in the country. Phoenix was one of the locations I went to, and they had just a catastrophe there of a leadership failure that resulted in veterans literally dying while they were waiting for care from the VA. So they had an appointment for some ailment, and because of the system of care there, they were not able to be seen. And it became a national scandal. The top leadership was taken away from the hospital, and I went in as sort of a fixer to help turn around the operation, and I was there for 90 days. And helped improve some things that I could do while I was there. One thing that was nice about that assignment was, you know, I had the support of literally the top parts of the VA. Was on phone calls with the secretary and was there as the front man to help turn around that hospital. So whatever I asked for, I got, which was a good thing. So you remember my story earlier about being an engineer that needed money, and it was always I found a leader to give me money. Well, as a CEO, I found a secretary that could give me money. So we were able to hire a bunch of staff, build a large healthcare system or healthcare clinic, about a 300,000 square foot lease that we were able to secure to deliver more care. And it was ironic when I got there that this is a part of the country that's fast growing. I mean, veterans are flocking to Phoenix because it's a great place to retire, and for whatever reason, the VA resource system was not delivering resources to that facility. So the staff there, while they were sort of unfairly criticized for what was happening, they really weren't given the resources they need to serve the veterans in the Phoenix area. And so I was excited to be part of that. And the outcome of that crises, as things tend to go with Congress, somebody wants to put their name on a bill to fix that problem in Phoenix. So they began passing these various laws that were supposed to help veterans get care in the community, and they ultimately have resulted in more bureaucracy and delay of care, and it's just become more and more of a challenge to get care in the community. So so those levels, those laws, and those systems really became a barrier to me as a senior leader to say yes to veterans and get them the care that they wanted. They began, the various laws that were passed also were trying to fix administrative issues within the VA, so they began taking away responsibility from the senior leader. So the IT department, for example, became a part of the VA that I no longer would report to me. The logistics function, all the delivery of medical supplies, all the things that we do for veterans with delivery of materials, that got moved away from the senior leader. I think recently the Human Resource Department was assigned away from the senior leader. So you can imagine trying to be a base commander, trying to be a CEO, and you don't have control over the hiring and firing process is just chaotic. Those kinds of changes really were a dissatisfier for me. And like I said, I felt good about when I left. I left at the top of my game and left a good operation, and that was just gratifying for me. I found from when I talked about earlier about taking care of yourself, that I needed to take care of myself, and it was good time to get out and find a new mission, and I found that with Ohio's Hospice. So I'm really happy to be where I am right now.
Okay. I moved here in 2011, and I started going to the Dayton, VA. And I thought, oh, this is okay. I get appointments pretty quick, and that was lovely. So I got tired of the snow real quick, and I moved back to California in 2014. And they told me at the LA VA that I might have breast cancer. That was a shocker.
Mm-hmm.
It took me 6 months to get another appointment.
There you go.
So for 6 months, I waited in paranoia, and but 6 months, that was horrible. Turns out, wasn't that at all.
Yeah, but wouldn't it have been nice to know that immediately?
Yes, and
Right.
and my sister, who's a CNA, was like, "Girl, let me help you with that," and was able to get me
Right.
squared away faster than the VA system out there. So when I returned to Dayton, because it's just way too expensive in California, it was so great to be back to Dr. Foz
Yep.
and on the purple team and at my own women's clinic where I get care rather rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the focuses that we had while I was there, and we continue to have, is just having the ability to have appointments. Now, you may not get the doctor you normally see, but you can get an appointment, and in this case that you just brought up, you probably wouldn't care who I saw. I just want to have a follow-up appointment to see what the heck's going on with this breast cancer thing. So I mean, that's an example of what happens in our system around, and it's unfortunate because why? Because you happen to want to live in California. Should your standard of care be different than what you get in Ohio? And while it's a national healthcare system, it's very much local delivery and local talent and local leadership. And I know that the greater LA VA is a challenging VA and big, and it doesn't surprise me that you had that experience there.
So many veterans.
Yeah.
And just not enough to go around. Our outlier clinic was the worst. Anyway, I wish they'd have had you.
Well, I mean, that's part of the frustration I have at times too, because why should it depend on the leader? It ought to be every veteran should get the same level of care wherever they go in the country, and so you know, we'll see. This latest law that's passed is supposed to help open up doors more quickly to private sector, and I think that might be good. In like your example, you know, the continuity of care is not that important to get a determination about whether or not you have breast cancer, but for other parts of the care that we deliver, you know, that VA experience is important for the veteran. But I think if we can balance between the things that the private sector can do very well and complement that with the VA, you know, this latest Mission Act could be a good legislation. We'll have to wait and see. The Dayton community is a test bed for this new legislation. So CareSource is going to be a test case to see how well can CareSource schedule appointments and get veterans out for care in the Dayton market. So we're going to be able to see very closely here in Dayton how well will this latest law work to help deliver care for veterans.
I'll let you know.
All right, very good.
I'll let you know. What are some life lessons you may have learned with working with military folks?
I guess life lessons for me was aha moments about things like, you know, somebody applies for a job and they're only a sergeant, and I realized very quickly that leadership training in the military is way above what you would expect. So you don't have to necessarily hire the lieutenant colonel or the major or the general. In fact, many times those levels don't do very well. But I tell you, the high quality of the enlisted rank that can come into an operation and provide instant leadership, certainly in my world, engineering was amazing to me. I could have a senior electrician who grew up in the system as a civilian, who maybe had strong leadership in the Union, or I could bring in somebody that came off a Navy ship, and the Navy operator would do a lot better in that environment. They could develop teamwork, they could develop people skills. They got with their customer to figure out what the mission was right away, and so those aha moments on just really respecting the training and preparation that military folks get as an employer, I always would pick prior military service over almost anything else. So that was great for me to see in the world that I was in, because I was exposed to a lot of those opportunities. Certainly here in the Miami Valley with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a lot of folks retiring out of those military roles we've got we get great recruitment here in Dayton because of that, because folks are coming in highly motivated, very well trained, and they have sort of that retirement nest egg they get from the military. So when they come to us, salary sometimes is not the main point. They want to continue to serve their brother officers and sister officers, and that's why they're coming to work for us. It's less about what kind of money can I earn.
I love that. I do. I do what I do now just because I love it so much, and just being able to serve other veterans and being a part of American Pride and the Patriot Pinup Girls is really satisfying. Okay. Is there anything you would like to tell us that we may have discussed or didn't get into fully?
Well, I would just emphasize again the program that we have with American Pride at Ohio's Hospice. And, you know, off the top of my head, I can't really tell you, you know, the contact information, and maybe part of the process will be to add that into my interview. But if you want to reach out to me at Ohio's Hospice, I'm Glenn Costie. It's spelled C-O-S-T-I-E. I'm the only Glenn Costie in our system. If you call Ohio's Hospice or Hospice of Dayton and ask for Glenn Costie and American Pride, we'd love to have you come volunteer and be part of our program. You know, being with folks that are at end of life is not everybody's cup of tea. So if there are other things you want to do in our operation, I mean, we are like a little city. We've got all kinds of occupations and all kinds of things you can do. So it's not necessarily being on the front lines with our patients, but we would welcome any veteran that wants to come and volunteer in our departments. They'd be more than welcome.
Like the Army, come in, set up shop, and continue to thrive. Okay. What message would you like to leave for future generations that will hear or view this interview?
I would say if you're looking for a way to start your life, I would say choose a military career. Whether you want to come in for 2 years, 4 years, or make it an entire career investment, 20 years, 25 years, you can't go wrong getting the preparation that you get in the military to begin your life. And whether you're coming out of high school or whether you're coming out of college, taking a couple of years to explore your military skills in any branch of service, I would highly recommend.
Okay. That concludes our interview with Glenn Costie. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
and
you.
your service to veterans.
Thank you very much.